Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Okay. Hare Krishna. So, by the grace of Krishna, we've got at least the seminars that I wanted to speak. We got the computer. My computer broke down, so we have about 7 or 8 different topics. The seminar as a whole is called Srila Prabhupada, the Living Bhagavatam. And what I did was I went through all my diaries principally and picked out different subject matters like prasadam or chanting or whatever, and compile them into different short seminars. So I was going to sometimes what I do is I read out the titles of the seminars, and then I ask the devotees to vote which topic they want to listen to. But I think tonight, and maybe for the next couple of days, we'll go on the I decided to go on the chanting seminar. So if everybody's happy with that, then we'll go right ahead. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, don't be afraid to ask, and we can stop and start. It's not that you have to just wait till the end. So December 26, 1976, Prabhupada was in Bombay. And we were having a conversation in his room. So he told us, he said that this movement is started because on this principle, that why these rascals are speaking not in the parampara. So this is the seed of starting this movement. Why are people not delivering the Shastra based on the parampara? So Prabhupada wanted to stop that. And we had just come from Wardha. Who knows where Wardha is? Wardha? Gandhi Ashram? Sevagram? Yeah, somewhere in the middle of India, somewhere. It's where the Congress Party was first formed. So that was something that was set up by some of the followers of Gandhi, and under the, not tutelage, but under the auspices of a man called Vinoba Bhave. Some of you may have heard of him. He has a reputation for being a saintly character. Actually, he's a full-on Mayavadi, but we give him at least some credit that he's altruistic and he's trying to do something to help people. So his followers started this Gita Pratishthan, and they were having a 3-day meeting in Wardha, and Prabhupada was invited to be one of the speakers. Anyway, so when that convention was held, Prabhupada was kind of fairly muted because he knew that everybody that was attending was a Mayavadi, so he wasn't really keen on speaking or even mixing with them. But he was keen that the people that organized that Pratishthan, that was Ramakrishna Bajaj, the owner of the Bajaj electrics and motorcycles and all that stuff, and Sriman Narayan, who was his brother-in-law. Sriman Narayan had been the first chief minister of Gujarat, because Gujarat actually was a little independent up until about 1963. So then they, formed the Gujarat state, and this Sriman Narayan, he was the first chief minister. So they were important people, and Prabhupada was keen to interest them in backing ISKCON's work. So although, he was walking into the lion's den, so to speak, with the Mayavadis, he had a purpose for that. Otherwise, he would never have bothered. Yeah, he would have just gone on with his own pandals and whatever. But he wanted to capture these pious people, and they were followers of Gandhi. So, if they joined up with us, they could do a lot of good. So the topic of the Pratishthan had been how to popularize the Bhagavad Gita amongst the Indian public. And Prabhupada's response to that was that if you don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is, then why bother propagating it? Yeah, then it's just nonsense. And he knew that everybody there, they all had their own ideas about what the Gita is and what it means. And when Prabhupada attended his, what they did was the first day was like an arrival day. And then the next day there was one day of discussion amongst all the delegates. There's probably about 25 or 26 people attending from different spiritual organizations. So they spent one day doing what they call workshops to figure out what could be done to popularize the Gita. Prabhupada did not attend that. The organizers realized that Prabhupada's not going to spend a full day, debating with these people. So what they decided was that they would do the workshop thing, and then the next morning they would call for Prabhupada and then read out to him what they decided on, the actions to be taken, and then get his feedback. So I was sitting with Prabhupada in his room, and they were a little late in calling for him on the third day. And Prabhupada sat down and he said, actually, it's better if they don't call me. He said, I don't even want to see their faces. But anyway, they called him. So as soon as Prabhupada sat down and they started reading out, what they decided, Prabhupada stopped them and he said, the thing is that if you don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is, then you shouldn't try and propagate it. He said, you have your ideas about spreading it, but you don't know what the Bhagavad Gita is. You don't accept it the way that Arjuna accepted it. But if you don't accept it the way Arjuna accepted it, then it's all useless. So he was really starting to push them, and one or two of them got the haunches up. They weren't happy that Prabhupada was preaching to them and telling them that they didn't know what they were doing. So there were one or two exchanges that went forth, back and forth. One man, Prabhupada said that, you have to be expert in Sanskrit to translate. So one of the attendees, he said, well, when you're translating, it's almost impossible to get a proper, the full meaning. So Prabhupada told him, he said, if you don't know Sanskrit, then why are you advertising that you're translating it? Don't do it. And somebody else said, well, what's the difference between your Gita and our Gita? He said, we have our interpretation and you have your interpretation. Prabhupada stopped him and said, it is not interpretation, it is presentation. The big difference. And the guy said, well, same thing. So then somebody else said, no, he's right, there is a difference. So it was going like this for about 20, 30 minutes. Prabhupada had prepared a sheet of about 21 or 22 different questions, and each question he had answered with a quote from the Bhagavad Gita and his purports. So he was going to present that to the attendees. So anyway, on the whole, Prabhupada didn't find it very enlivening. There was a funny incident the first night that we got there. We got there in the morning, and in the evening they took us around the Gandhi ashram. That was like a small area that Gandhi had been given the land, and he made this little village, and that's where he used to go when he was too fried with politics. He'd go to, they call it the Gandhi Sevashram or whatever. So he would go and stay there and just do his cotton, threading, whatever it is. So we were invited to go and have a look around the Gandhi ashram. Prabhupada agreed, he was agreeable. So we drove there. We spent about an hour wandering around, guided tour. They had some little mud and straw house where he used to sit there with his weaving machine, and there was no telephone there. So the idea was, to live naturally and simply, and then he could think what to do with his politics. So we went round and we saw all these different places. Then just on dusk, then they all gathered in this designated area, and they started chanting. And they were chanting like a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita, a couple of verses from the Quran, a couple of verses from the Bible. Everybody was included. And it was done very kind of sedately, just in contrast to our kirtans. It was more like a funeral. They were just sitting there and chanting these mantras. So Prabhupada just and what they did was they brought Gandhi's asana, a cotton, seat, and they put that at the top, and they all sat facing that. So that's, again, we have our deities who sit and meditate on Krishna, and they got Gandhi's seat, cotton seat. So at the end of it, then they asked Prabhupada if he would sign the visitor's book. So he agreed. And he put in the visitor's book that today I have attended the Gandhi ashram in Sevagram. It is so nice and peaceful. I have asked them to chant the Hare Krishna mantra. So it's like a double entendre there, He's praising them on the one hand, but the other meaning is that you're not doing it, so you should start. Then we went back to the car, and I opened the front door for Prabhupada to get in. And when Prabhupada got into a vehicle, he kind of went in half backwards. So as he was edging into the seat, just to nobody in particular, he said, Nirvisesha Shunyavadi. So that was his estimation. Anyway, so we were there for a couple of days. Then we went by train to Bombay. And so we were discussing, and Prabhupada, practically every discussion that he had, it affected him. These Mayavadis claiming that they could spread the glories of Krishna's Gita without knowing actually what it means. So this particular room conversation was in Bombay, and Prabhupada told us, he said, now this movement is started because on this principle that why these rascals are speaking not in the parampara. So that was because of that meeting. Because Prabhupada, all the time that he was, preaching with it through ISKCON, he always stressed the need to have a bona fide understanding and translation of, Gita and Bhagavatam and anything. So this was not new, but he got a bit of extra impetus from attending that meeting. So he said, this is the seed of starting this movement. I must start the movement. That is the impetus of this movement. That they must speak according to the parampara, and someone allowed them to speak otherwise. Therefore, I wrote this book, Bhagavad Gita, as it is. Don't make interpretations. And by the grace of Krishna, it has become successful to some extent. So that is the impetus. Why they should talk all nonsense. So Prabhupada was in a mood of challenging and going to war for not presenting the Bhagavad Gita in the proper way. So a little later on in the day, we were in Prabhupada's room again, and he was speaking with some man who was like a life member, and the man was agreeing with everything that Prabhupada was saying, and Prabhupada was kind of trying to encourage him to do something. Don't just speak, but do something. And it's quite funny, actually. So he said, you're willing to give your advice, yeah, but you never do it. So he was getting on this person's case in a friendly way, that you're speaking, yes, we should do something, but when you're asked to do something, you don't. Yeah. So he said, this is the Indian policy. These white elephants, they'll come and dance, means the Britishers, and you'll see and you were busy with your daughter's marriage. That's all. Everybody in India knows what that means. You know, you've got to get, it's the priority of your life. You have to get your daughter married. So Prabhupada said that's all. So Krishna consciousness means Vairagya Vidya. Vairagya Vidya Nija Bhakti Yoga. Nobody can become a Bhakta unless he is disgusted with material life. Oh, I'll do this, I shall do that. But they'll never do Bhakti Yoga. That's all. So this is not possible. Before leaving my family life, I wanted to get all my sons and daughters married, but some of them disagreed. My wife disagreed. All right, let them go to hell. I don't care. Time is up. Never mind you are married or not married. Now see to your own business. So that was Prabhupada's mood. He was trying to get his, daughters married. And somehow or another, the last one, Bhaktivedanta, she's, I think she died last year. Anyway, the youngest daughter, he tried to find a suitable husband, and he actually found one or two nice boys that would suit the role, but somehow or another his wife disagreed with them all. And Prabhupada told us later on that the reason why was because she wanted to keep the youngest girl as a maid, like a maidservant. If she was married, then she'd have to move out of the house. But if she wasn't married, then the mother would have a helper to keep the household running, so she wouldn't let her get married. So Prabhupada got to a certain point, as he says, all right, let them go to hell. And that's his own words. The time is up. Yeah, now I have to go out and do my business, which is preaching. So, actually, it just reminds me, one time in Hawaii, in the evening, I was giving Prabhupada his massage, and he started chuckling. As I was massaging him, he started laughing. He said, "You know my story?" I said, "What's that, Prabhupada?" He said, "Tea on me." So I'd heard it before, but I wanted to hear it from Prabhupada. So I said, "No, Prabhupada." So Prabhupada told me that, his wife was so obstinate and she wouldn't join in with anything, so he became, completely disgusted with the whole situation. And one day he came back to the house, and his wife had taken his Bhagavatams and swapped them for tea biscuits with some trader. So when Prabhupada saw that, he became completely disgusted. And he told her, all right, so now this is it. It's either tea or me. You either give up your tea drinking or you give up your husband. Oh, well then I'll give up my husband. She thought she thought I was joking. But a few days later, I borrowed 10 rupees from a friend, and I went, and I never came back. I said, "Where did you go?" "Yeah, anywhere." Because we know he went to the Gaudiya mountain and moved in there. The family thought that Prabhupada was just doing what he usually does, is go out on, business excursions, and he would often be away for days or weeks, doing his business. So they were used to not seeing him for a while. But later, the last time, when he said, "This is it, I don't care, the time is up," he went and he never came back. So, much to our good fortune, of course. And of course the family, they get the credit of, being Prabhupada's relatives. They're special people in the sense that, their consciousness also was on Prabhupada. He was the leader of the family. So they naturally get purified from that. So anyway, Prabhupada carried on. He said, "I or you, then who will take care of the marriage of your daughter? Suppose you die immediately, then who will take care?" So the person that he was talking to, he said, "Well, God will help them." So then Prabhupada said, "Then why don't you do that now? Why wait? God will take care." He admitted, if he dies early, then God has to take care. So let him die. Yeah, God will look after. So he said, "Why don't you do that now? God will take care." It is called, my Guru Maharaj used to say, civil suicide. Yeah, civil suicide. When you become a sannyasi or vanaprastha, that's it. Your own life is over. You move forward spiritually and forget about all the past. So that was an interesting conversation. Let them go to hell. He wasn't interested anymore. So we're talking about the principle of chanting, because that was Prabhupada's mission, to introduce the Hare Krishna mantra all over the world. So in July of 1977, Prabhupada was in Vrindavan. He'd gotten extremely sick during the Gaur-Purnima festival in early 1977. It was really the beginning of the end physically, and Prabhupada didn't eat anything for about 6 days. He had this very high temperature. He stopped seeing anybody. A lot of the time he was just laying on a cotton mat on the floor. Sometimes he'd lie down on the bed. So everything changed, like the routines that had been well established throughout the 70s. And there was, Prabhupada was just physically not capable of doing it anymore. And there'd been a change in servants. Tamal Krishna Goswami, he came from America, and he applied to the GBC and Prabhupada that he should be Prabhupada's permanent secretary, because he needed some efficient, he needed somebody efficient to look after him. So, and at the same time, for myself, I was starting to think that my time on Prabhupada's party was up. And I'd been with him for 16 months by that time. And I started to recognize that. I did write it in my diary that I thought that Prabhupada's preaching Leela was now coming to an end, and that he was going to go into Nirjana Bhajan, be a bit more exclusive. So that's how it turned out, actually. And as I left, Prabhupada sent me back to Australia, made me the GBC there. And Upendra Prabhu, who had looked after Prabhupada in the 1960s, he was one of the earliest servants. And he had also been Prabhupada's personal servant in 1975 as well. So he was called back. So Upendra spent the last 8 or 10 months with looking after Prabhupada. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there looking after all the secretarial work. They did take Prabhupada to London. That was the last trip. But Prabhupada actually, he wasn't really fit for any of that, but he was reluctant to give up preaching. He couldn't stop. So, as he told us once or twice, my only ambition is that I can fight to the last breath like Arjuna. So this was the last breath. So in July of 77, we'd already had a crisis in May of 77. All the GBCs were called to Vrindavan. Prabhupada made his last will and testament. Then somehow or another, the disease kind of subdued, so all the GBCs went back to their zones. Then Prabhupada stayed in Vrindavan with his personal party. So one day in July, Bon Maharaj, Prabhupada's godbrother, who of course we mentioned was the first one to go to England in 1930s, he had come to see Prabhupada. He'd heard that he was really sick. And Bhakti Charu Maharaj was there. He'd just taken sannyas about 3 weeks before. He was looking after Prabhupada's personal needs, medicines and things like that. So when Bon Maharaj came, they had a conversation with Srila Prabhupada. It was all in Bengali, but Bhakti Charu Maharaj translated it all for us afterwards. So in that conversation that they had, then and this is reprinted in Bhakti Charu Maharaj's book, The Ocean of Mercy. I don't know whether anybody's seen that. It's like anyway, he reproduced it there. So I read through that. So it graphically illustrates the underlying cause of Prabhupada's success as a preacher. Sometime in early July 1977 in Vrindavan, two of Prabhupada's godbrothers came to see him. One of them was Akinchana Das Babaji, Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji, and the other was Bon Maharaj. So Bon Maharaj was well known in the Gaudiya Mat as one of the devotees who had been sent to England in 1933 in the first attempt by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati to preach Krishna consciousness in the West. Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji was the only disciple of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta whom he had authorized to simply chant as his main service. Everybody else was sent out, but because he was a sincere, genuine chanter, he was allowed, all right, just make that your full-time service. So whenever we met with Kinchana Krishna Das Babaji, he was always chanting. If you were having a conversation with him, you know, he would speak, and then when you replied, he would start chanting automatically. He always had the holy name on his lips. It didn't matter where he was or what he was doing. He was always chanting. So if anybody knew about chanting, he was one of them for sure. So he was always smiling and laughing, and during even short breaks in a conversation, he would chant Hare Krishna. So one evening, this is from Bhakti True Maharaj's book, Ocean of Mercy. He says, one evening, Bon Maharaj came along with Krishna Das Babaji Maharaj. Seeing his close friends, Prabhupada's face lit up with a bright smile. I arranged 2 chairs near his bed for them to speak together. So Babaji Maharaj glorified Srila Prabhupada for his achievements all around the world, and Bon Maharaj agreed, saying that Srila Prabhupada had been blessed by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Then in his cheerful manner, Babaji Maharaj said to Bon Maharaj, he said, you are a great preacher, he is also a great preacher. You are a great scholar, he is also a great scholar. You have a very good command over the English language, he also has a wonderful command over the English language. You went to the West, he went to the West. Then how come he has been so successful, but you were not? It was quite a pointed remark. You know, he's a scholar, you're a scholar, he speaks English, you speak English. You both went to the West, he was successful and you were not. So you can imagine Bon Maharaj was not. He was a bit put out after that. So Bon Maharaj smiled without saying anything. Srila Prabhupada looked a little embarrassed and remained silent. So Babaji Maharaj broke the uneasy silence. He said he was successful because of his unflinching faith in the holy names. So that was his estimate why Prabhupada succeeded. Of course, what that says for Bon Maharaj, you can decide yourself. But that dependence and full surrender to the holy name, that's what made Prabhupada successful. So, in that regard, this is the song that Prabhupada wrote on the 18th of September in 1965, just after he had arrived in America. So, I won't read the Bengali, but I'll read the English. So Prabhupada was singing, so somehow or another, O Lord, you have brought me here to speak about you. It's New York. Now, my Lord, it is up to you to make me a success or a failure as you like. O spiritual master of all the worlds, I can simply repeat your message. So if you like, you can make my power of speaking suitable for their understanding. Only by your causeless mercy will my words become pure. I am sure that when this transcendental message penetrates their hearts, they will certainly feel engladdened and thus become liberated from all unhappy conditions of life. O Lord, I am just like a puppet in your hands. So if you have brought me here to dance, then make me dance, make me dance. O Lord, make me dance as you like. I have no devotion, nor do I have any knowledge, but I have strong faith in the holy name of Krishna. I have been designated as Bhaktivedanta, and now, if you like, you can fulfill the real purport of Bhaktivedanta. Then Prabhupada signs it. The most unfortunate, insignificant beggar, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, on board the ship Jaladuta at Commonwealth Pier in Boston, Massachusetts. So that was just when he landed. So I said New York, but he actually landed. He landed in Boston, but that was just for a short transit. The ship actually went on to New York and Prabhupada got down there. But that was Prabhupada's mood. Yeah, only you can bring all of this about. I don't know what I'm doing. These people are, far away from real spiritual culture, but if you can, you can enhance their power of hearing so that they can understand what I want to say. So over the next 10 years, that was 65, so in 1975 and 76, then of course we saw how ISKCON grew and took root in many countries of the world, spread all over the world. So on March the 15th, 1976, that was Gaurpurnima, I was on Prabhupada's party at that time, in Mayapur. Prabhupada's godbrother, B.R. Srila Swami, a very close friend of his, he came to visit Srila Prabhupada at our temple. For a few years, whenever Prabhupada came to Mayapur, then either he would go for a few hours and see Sridhar Maharaj at his place in Navadvip, or Sridhar Maharaj would come and stay with Prabhupada for a few hours at Chandrodaya Mandir. So in 1976, then Sridhar Maharaj came to our place. So Prabhupada's godbrother, B.R. Sridhar Swami, came in Prabhupada's car from his mutt in Navadvip to Mayapur. So Prabhupada sent his own car over to bring him. So he stayed for most of the afternoon. He and Prabhupada took prasadam together on the veranda. Prabhupada had him stay in the room right next to his own, and after a light rest, then they talked for most of the rest of the afternoon. So during their conversations, they exchanged reports on each other's preaching activities. Srila Prabhupada told me afterwards. So I didn't actually go in the room when Sridhar Maharaj came. From the time that I joined Prabhupada's party, I always made it a point to be in Prabhupada's room whenever there was any kind of visitor. That was just in case, something needed to be brought or someone needed to be called. But mainly it was because I was very keen to see what Prabhupada was saying and listen to all the conversations, because I figured this is the fast track to learning how to live Krishna consciously. Whatever Prabhupada was doing, it was for Krishna. So I was always very eager to hear what Prabhupada had to say, no matter what was going on. Excuse me. But when Sridhar Maharaj came, he was, you've got two Mahabhagavats talking. So I just felt I can't just sit here in the room whilst they're having their conversation. It would be impolite. So I left the room and they talked between themselves for a couple of hours. As soon as Sridhar Maharaj left to go back to Navadvip, I was straight into Prabhupada's room, hoping that he would tell me what they'd been talking about. So during their conversations, they exchanged reports on each other's preaching activities. Prabhupada told me afterwards that Sridhar Maharaj had said that he regarded him, Prabhupada, as the real Acharya. Sridhar Maharaj told him that Lord Chaitanya had given this prediction that the chanting of the holy names would go to every town and village around the world. But he and his godbrothers had not taken this statement literally. Now, by Prabhupada's efforts, he said he could understand the real meaning of that verse. So, every town and village in the whole world, they'd already had the experience of Bon Maharaj and his compatriots going to Europe, England and Germany, and not coming out with anything. So there was a lot of skepticism. Maybe this verse, Prachibacheja Chaitato Nagaradi Gram, maybe it just means like the whole of India or something like that. But Prabhupada took it literally. So when Prabhupada went there, immediately Krishna consciousness took root and started to grow, and the godbrothers were shocked. in such a short period of time, Prabhupada actually created this ISKCON movement and started preaching all over the world. And the Hare Krishna mantra was, heard in hundreds of cities all around the world. Yeah, George Harrison, the most famous people in the world in the 1960s were the Beatles. Yeah, and George Harrison was very serious about his spiritual life. He liked Prabhupada, he liked the devotees, so he started chanting. They made the record, the Hare Krishna record. It went all over the world, so there was some amazing stuff going on. So Prabhupada actually was fulfilling the prediction of Lord Chaitanya, that at some point the holy name will go to every town and village in the world. So Sridhar Maharaj told him that actually we didn't take this, instruction seriously or literally. Yeah, he thought maybe it's some kind of poetic glorification of the holy name, but they never actually believed that it could happen. So he told Prabhupada, he said, but now by your efforts, we can see and understand the real meaning of that verse. So he was very appreciative. And there was also, actually the year before, Bon Maharaj, because he'd gone in the 1930s and not been successful, but what he did was he made connections with different professors in various universities in England and Germany and the other places. So he would sometimes go and visit these different places in the 1940s and 1950s. He was still going to the West, but he was only dealing with these scholars. He was a bit disdainful about, having to deal with people who were not educated. So that, that was his pride, that he wanted to only speak with the scholars. So in 1975, he was on tour, and he had also gone to America and Europe. And so Prabhupada was in correspondence with him, and he invited him to come, Bon Maharaj, to come and attend the Rath Yatra in, I think, Philadelphia or San Francisco. And he wanted Bon Maharaj to come and join up with him, at least just to meet up. So this is a letter to Bon Maharaj from 7th of July 1975. So Prabhupada says, after making all these arrangements, I shall have to go to Philadelphia, where I shall attend the Rath Yatra ceremony. Then I'll go to San Francisco, where, as usual, our Rath Yatra will take place there for the 7th year running. The mayor of the city of San Francisco has declared 2 days local holiday for this particular ceremony of Rath Yatra. So Prabhupada was making a real impact. So this will take place on the 20th of July. If you can find the time to come to Hawaii, I thought I would take you with me to all of these places, and surely you would appreciate my humble attempts. I thank you very much for your appreciation, quote, that you have done a wonderful job in this country. Sripad Sridhar Maharaj also appreciated my service. He said that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's prediction, Prativachay Chaitato Nagaradi Gram Sabatra Prachahoive Mornam, would remain a dream only, but he congratulated me that I have done it practically. So that was in 75. When I was there, that was the year later. Sridhar Maharaj said the same thing. We thought it was just a poetic kind of glorification, but you've actually done it. So at least Bon Maharaj was, impressed enough to admit that. And later on, unfortunately, we found out, because we had our, what we called the library party. So after the Chaitanya Charitamrita was published, and so many volumes of the Bhagavatam were coming out, they formed, Satsvarup Maharaj formed what we called the library party. And they were going to each and every library, every college and university, and selling standing orders of Prabhupada's books. A standing order means that, there's going to be a series coming out, maybe half of it is already published, and the rest is yet to come. But you buy the whole set, and automatically when the new ones come out, they're sent to you in So that's a standing order. Not that yet we had to go back every time a new volume came out. There was already a standing order from the libraries, to get supply. So they were traveling around selling to the universities, and they came across one or two places where unfortunately Bon Maharaj had been there first, and when he found out that the devotees were selling sets of Prabhupada's books, he tried to discourage some of the scholars from buying them. So he was envious. So although he was writing, words of praise, Prabhupada found out that he was discouraging the scholars from reading his books because they weren't up to the scholarly standards. So from that, Prabhupada said, all right, he's not allowed in our temples anymore. So he was quite disgusted with him over that. So anyway, some God brothers were in genuine appreciation, like Srila Maharaj, Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji, BV, Puri Maharaj. They were supporting him. They recognized the amazing attempt that Prabhupada was undertaking, and they were generally very encouraging. Some of the other God brothers were not. There was another God brother that was prominent in Mayapur, and in 1976 Prabhupada made an application to the government of Bengal to acquire, that he might be allowed to acquire 300 acres of land so we could build Mayapur city. So in those days, still, even now, there's this Land Ceiling Act. So any individual or organization, you can only own 24 acres at the maximum, but you can get a dispensation from the government to get more land if what you're doing is considered to be beneficial, to the Indian public or the people in that area. So it was a mix. Prabhupada was pushing on despite some of his God brothers. This God brother that I'm mentioning, he actually, when we were making the application, our men were going to the local villages and getting all the villagers to sign up, yes, we want ISKCON to have this land because they're going to build a big temple. That means the economy will grow, etc., etc. So they were keen to help. But one fellow, he had gotten a petition up in his village, all signed, and he was on his way to our temple, and he was actually stopped and captured by this God brother's disciples, and they took him to the God brother, and he chastised him. Why are you helping this ISKCON? Why are you trying to help them to get set up in Mayapur? We don't want them here. And they took the petition and they destroyed it. So Jayapataka Maharaj reported that to Prabhupada. Prabhupada was in Hawaii or America at that time. So Prabhupada was quite, disgusted with that kind of attitude. Later on, that same God brother, about a year after Prabhupada's disappearance, he happened to attend a function and he was speaking. And then one of our men went there and he was to speak also, Bhagavad Das from New York. And Bhagavad had a really good memory and brain. He was a good speaker. And he got up and he started rattling off all these verses from Rupa Goswami and other places that, you can turn bell metal into gold. That even the Yavanas and Malechas become purified Vaishnavas, by the holy name. So he rattled off all of these quotes, and this Gaudiya man, he was shocked. And he apparently made the comment that these Western devotees, they know more Shastra than our sannyasis. This man, Bhagavad, was a brahmachari at that time. He said this brahmachari knows more than our sannyasis. So then he realized what Prabhupada had done. And he, gave up his enmity. And he actually came and visited our Calcutta temple. And he was full of praise for what Prabhupada had done. So it took, some of them were a little bit slow to catch on. Some of them were just envious. And some people, appreciated. So that was the situation. So in April of '74, Prabhupada visited Tirupati. This was on April the 28th. And he had gotten a letter from Rupanuga Prabhu in America. So in that letter, Rupanuga just mentioned like one sentence about the negativity of some of Prabhupada's godbrothers. And there was an incident actually, that when the devotees arrived in Mayapur, then a few of the senior devotees, they got some kind of invitation to attend a function at Sridhar Maharaj's mat. So they went there without telling Prabhupada or without getting Prabhupada's permission. And when they got there, then some of the speakers were minimizing. They recognized the white devotees are there, but they were minimizing Prabhupada's attempts to spread Krishna consciousness. When they came back, Prabhupada immediately called for them all into his room and asked what had they said. So it wasn't drastic. At least Sridhar Maharaj offered some praise, but other, attendees were not so generous. So Prabhupada got very upset, and he ordered them, now you never go to these temples again unless I say. So that was a kind of the mood. So afterwards, Rupanuga, who had been one of the devotees that went to that function, when he got back to America, he'd been thinking about, Prabhupada's chastisement. So he wrote him a letter to apologize. And he just mentioned in one sentence, basically, that I don't think that they're very genuine. Only Sridhar Maharaj. So that was it. It was just like a one-liner. The reply that Prabhupada sent was like 2 pages long, prompted by this one line. So he tells Rupanuga, he says, you're right about Sridhar Maharaj's genuineness. But in my opinion, he's the best of the lot. So even Rupanuga questioned Sridhar Maharaj's intentions in having Prabhupada's disciples come over without asking permission. So he wasn't appreciative of that. But still, he said that he's fairly, genuine, and in my opinion, he's the best of the lot of them. So Prabhupada went on, he said, he is my old friend. At least he executes the regulative principles of devotional service. I do not wish to discuss about the activities of my godbrothers, but it is a fact that they have no life for preaching. All are satisfied with the place for residence in the name of the temple. They engage disciples to get foodstuff by transcendental devices and eat and sleep. They have no idea or brain how to broadcast the cult of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. My Guru Maharaj used to lament many times for this reason, and he thought that if at least one man had understood the principle of preaching, then his mission would be considered a success. In the latter days of my Guru Maharaj, he was very disgusted. Actually, he left this world earlier. Otherwise, he would have continued to live for more years. Still, he requested to his disciples to form a strong governing body for preaching the cult of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He never recommended anyone to be an acharya of the Gaudiya Mat. But Sridhar Maharaj is responsible for disobeying this order of Guru Maharaj, and he and others who were already dead unnecessarily thought that there must be one acharya. If Guru Maharaj had seen someone who was qualified at that time to be an acharya, he would have mentioned it, because on the night before he passed away, he talked of so many things, but he never mentioned an acharya. His idea was that the acharya was not to be nominated amongst the governing body. He said openly, you make a GBC and conduct the mission. So his idea was that amongst the members of the GBC who would come out successful and self-effulgent, then he would automatically be recognized and selected as the acharya. So although Prabhupada was very close with Sridhar Maharaj, he appreciated him very much, Sridhar Maharaj appreciated him very much, still Prabhupada pointed out, unsolicited, right? Rupanuga was not asking about Srila Maharaj's position or this or that. He made a one-line comment, but that prompted Prabhupada to explain why his godbrothers failed. And one of the reasons why was because Sridhar Maharaj and two of the godbrothers, they superficially installed another person, what was his name? Ananta Vasudev, as the acharya of the whole mat. And that caused, furious backlash, and everything broke up from there. So Sridhar Maharaj, seeing that, he, kind of pulled back from the whole thing. But it was already too late by that time, the war was on. So Prabhupada laid the responsibility at the feet of Sridhar Maharaj and several others that were with him. So whilst, appreciating his godbrothers, Prabhupada wanted us, his followers, to be very clear about what we should be doing and how we should do it, and especially after his own disappearance. He said many times, don't wreck everything as soon as I leave, don't spoil it or cooperate together. And therefore he made this will, and the first item in the will is that you have this governing body commissioner. And you saw last night that we got that one-sheet handwritten will of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the second item on it, form a GBC of 10 to 12 persons. So Prabhupada said that we were successful because he did that. And the other godbrothers were not successful because they disobeyed that order or request of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, and therefore they lost the power to preach. He said, of course, some of them, they're going on. Whatever they can do, they're doing. But the Gaudiya Math in its height was a very powerful preaching organization, something that had not been seen for a long time here in India. They had 64 mats, and they'd gone to Burma. These men had been sent to England. So they were very powerful. But as soon as they split up and argued, all gone, finished. So Sridhar Maharaj and his two associates, this is Prabhupada continue on in the letter. So Sridhar Maharaj, in the conversation, Sridhar Maharaj and his two associate gentlemen unauthorizedly selected one acharya, and later it proved to be a failure. So this is the second half of the letter. The result is that now everybody is claiming to be acharya, even though they may be kinista adhikari with no ability to preach. In some of the camps, the acharya is being changed 3 times a year. So therefore we must not commit the same mistake in our ISKCON camp. Actually, amongst my godbrothers, no one is qualified to be the acharya. This is Prabhupada in 1974. So it is better not to mix with my godbrothers very intimately, because instead of inspiring our students and disciples, they may sometimes pollute them. And there was previous incidences in 1970 especially. There was this influence that was coming in. Later on, Prabhupada said it came innocently through Achyutananda, Prabhupada's disciple, and from the Gaudiya Math, through him to the devotees in America, and criticizing that Prabhupada had been given the name Prabhupada and so many things. So Prabhupada is saying that actually none of my godbrothers are qualified to be acharyas. So it is better not to mix with my godbrothers very intimately, because instead of inspiring our students, they may sometimes pollute them. So this attempt was made previously by them, and especially by Madhava Maharaj and Tirtha Maharaj and Bon Maharaj. So he even named the chief culprits. But somehow or another, I saved the situation. So this is going on. We should be very careful about them and not mix with them. This is my instruction to you all. So this is not an option. You don't go there. They cannot help us in our movement, but they are very competent to harm our natural progress. So we must be very careful of them. So that was in the 70s when Prabhupada was there. ISKCON was a new entity. Not a lot of people understood what Prabhupada was trying to do. There was a lot of criticism and envy. generally speaking, not very welcoming. So Prabhupada wanted to keep his disciples aloof from this kind of criticism, because ultimately it would come back, and poison the disciples of Srila Prabhupada against him. So he was very careful about that. So although, as I say, Sridhar Maharaj was very genuine and he appreciated what Prabhupada was doing, but he was one of the main persons who made that mistake of promoting one person to be the acharya of the entire Gaudiya Math. And as a result of that, everything fell apart and everybody went their own way. And whether he recognized it or not, that he was, to blame for some of that, Prabhupada didn't, hesitate to instruct us where the faults lay, not because he was criticizing, but because he wanted, he wanted to save them from that criticism and recognize what he was doing in his preaching. So, and he wanted us to understand what went wrong so that we didn't make the same mistakes. So that's like 75, 76, so now we'll jump back to the beginning of Prabhupada's mission. This is August the 12th, 1965. Prabhupada's he's got 1 day prior to the departure of the Jaladuta. So there was a newspaper article that Prabhupada must have taken around to the different newspapers, and it was reproduced, Prabhupada's public relations statement. It was reproduced in the paper on August the 12th, 1965, the day before Prabhupada set off. And its headline is, "The Lord's Message Goes to America." I went over this yesterday, I'll just read through it quickly. Lord Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, "Prativichaya Chajato Nagaradi Gram, Savracha Pracha Hoibe Moranam." That prophecy is going to be fulfilled now. That was the Prabhupada we knew. He was very clear about what he was doing. He was very clear about the philosophy. He was very clear about how to do things and not do things. And he was very, clear about how to advertise what he was doing as well and call people's attention. So immediately he says, this prophecy is going to be fulfilled now. He's just preparing to go to the West. Srimat Bhaktivedanta Swami, a resident of Vrindavan, so he's no longer a boy from Calcutta, he's a resident of Vrindavan, has translated the Srimad Bhagavatam into English in 60 volumes. He had 3 volumes at the time, first canto, and complete with word-for-word meanings and purports. Before this great work could be appreciated by his countrymen, people from far-off America have expressed their admiration of this supernormal achievement. Prabhupada's good at, advertising. Supernormal achievement, and it was a supernormal achievement. And I'll come back to that in a second. So they have invited him so that they may meet with him in person and acquaint themselves with his work. So Prabhupada actually didn't know anybody in America, but he was saying here that the people of America have appreciated before the Indians themselves have appreciated. So I'm going there. So he is departing from Calcutta for New York this 12th day of August. Actually, he left on the 13th. But that was, Prabhupada's unique style. And as far as this supernormal achievement of translating 60 volumes of the Bhagavatam, he was going to do it, but that was kind of very typical of Srila Prabhupada, that he would kind of state what the goal was that he was going to achieve. And when you think about when Prabhupada was sat in the Radha Damodar temple in those 2 rooms, he had no typewriter, he was handwriting to start with. But when he began this task of presenting the Bhagavatam, and purports in English, In 1960, Prabhupada was 64 years old. In 1964, when he finished the first canto, 3 volumes, then what was he? He was 68. 68. And if you do the calculation that he did the first canto in 4 years, there's another 11 cantos. If they average another 4 years each, Prabhupada would have been about 114 or something by the time he'd finished it. But still he did it. He took up the task. And one of his friends, he mentions this in the foreword of the second volume of the first canto, that some of his friends doubted the veracity of what he was doing. Such a huge work, 18,000 verses. He's an old man, and he's now sitting down to translate the whole thing, and with the intention of going out and preaching with it. So how can you possibly do that? It's impossible for an ordinary living being. And Prabhupada, told him, look, this is not such a big task. He said that in the heavenly planets, the Bhagavatam is in millions of volumes. So if I do one version in 60 volumes, what's the harm to that? It's nothing compared to what the demigods have and the literature that they have. Because what is the Bhagavatam? It's the pastimes of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. There are literally millions of volumes if you want to print them out. So Prabhupada, disregarded their concern. Even if it seemed impossible, it had already been done by the demigods, so I'm going to do it now for this planet. So that was his determination. Question, all right.
Why Prabhupada did that advertisement in
India? You don't have to whisper, we're all eager to hear what you say.
Why should Prabhupada publish that in newspapers, that advertisement that he's going? Is it to get some support, or what was the idea?
Well, that was, Prabhupada's nature. He wanted to involve as many people as possible in not just reading the books, but actively preaching. That was his nature. He always was active. So whenever he approached anybody, he would immediately solicit their attention and, get them somehow or another involved in what he wanted to do. The problem for Prabhupada was that in India they'd lost the taste. And so he had a plan when he was living in Jhansi. There were some medical students that were staying in the same house as him. And he was trying to educate them, but only one of them really took him seriously, this Prabhakar Acharya. And Prabhupada did initiate him when they were in Jhansi. That must have been around about 1955. And Prabhupada initiated him. That was his first disciple. But he said actually he does nothing. He took initiation, but then he went off and did whatever he liked. So practically speaking, he wasn't really a disciple. He took initiation, Haridas, that was the name. But Prabhupada was looking for people to, actively support him. And, what he intended to do, which he's explained somewhere else in a Bhagavatam purport, that the desire of a pure devotee, if he desires something, Krishna must fulfill it. So he had, that confidence that if I just try, Krishna will fulfill that desire. That was what he was working on. So anyway, he got the work done, and that's what happened. When he arrived in America, he had no belongings or anything. And how would he continue on with, not just the first canto of the Bhagavatam, there were so many other books that he wanted to write as well. So as soon as he arrived in America, Krishna started supplying the means by which he could fulfill that desire of translating the whole Bhagavatam. He sent him some disciples. Those disciples, took over the typing, so Prabhupada didn't have to spend so much time on that. They, got into the electronic publishing scene, and gradually, all the things that Prabhupada had to do by himself in Vrindavan, he was able to hand over to very qualified disciples and they boosted, they started the BBT. First of all, it was ISKCON Press, then it became the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, and they took it all up. So Prabhupada was able to speed up the rate of his translation work phenomenally. Yeah, and at least in 1976, the BBT were producing one volume of the Bhagavatam every every month. Because in 75, Prabhupada had gone to see the BBT. It had been removed from New York and set up in Los Angeles, and he went there to check it all out and see how they were doing. So when he got there, he found out that there were 17 volumes of books translated, commentated on, but not yet in production. And he was very angry about it. And on a morning walk, he ordered Rameshwar and the other BBT devotees, I'm going to be here for 2 months. When I come back, I want all 17 volumes published. So he gave them 2 months to publish 17 volumes. And that means everything. They had to do all the art. They had to do the Sanskrit, the Bengali, everything. And the reaction was, but Prabhupada, that's impossible. 17 volumes in 2 months. Prabhupada, stuck his head up. He said, impossible is a word in a fool's dictionary. So that was it. They realized he was serious. So they left the morning walk early. They went straight back to the temple. Rameshwara called all the workers of the BBT. He told them, this is it, Prabhupada's order, 17 volumes in 2 months, get to work. And they put them on a 24-hour rotation, 8-hour shifts. And they had the artists, painting in like a car production line. One person does this bit, puts the wheel on, another person puts the seats in, another person does. So like that, every artist, they like to, put their skill into that. They hate working with other people. That's the nature of artists. They want the credit themselves. So they stopped that. They put all the artists on the same shift system. Somebody would come in and do the trees. Somebody would come on the same painting. Somebody would come in and do the hands or the face or the feet or whatever. And in this way, this production line was started. Everybody had to put their false egos to one side. And, after 2 months, they actually did it. Radha Ballabha, he was the manager of the BBT at that time. Rameshwara was the GBC. And Radha Ballabha told me that one night, late at night, one newly printed volume had arrived. It had been sent from the printer. I think there was some New York company. They had completed the printing of one of the volumes and sent it by courier straight away to LA. So in the middle of the night, Radha Ballabha received this book, and he thought Prabhupada will be in ecstasy to see another new book coming out. So he went to Prabhupada's rooms and showed him, Prabhupada, we got a new volume out. So Prabhupada kind of kept a straight face. He said, all right, so why are you here? And in other words, get on with it. This is only one volume, where's the rest? So Radha Ballabha, his plan was that Prabhupada would, give him a little praise or praise the devotees. Prabhupada just said, so? You've still got more to do. So that was Prabhupada. He was, very dynamic. Okay, so when Prabhupada left on the 13th of August, then he took with him, not only did he put this little article in the newspaper, but he printed up a leaflet, 8-page leaflet, I think it was, which he took to America and he would give out to anybody that he met, and it would explain in brief, what his business was in coming to America. So in 1976, we were in Mayapur, New Mayapur in France, and I came into Prabhupada's room, and somebody had put a copy of this advertised, like introductory pamphlet on Prabhupada's desk, I don't know where it came from. It might have been Yogeshwar or one of the BBT devotees. But when Prabhupada finished his rest, he came into his room and he saw this is one of the original pamphlets that he took with him to America. So as Prabhupada leaned back, in his seat, he asked me, all right, tell me what does it say? So he apparently hadn't seen it himself for a few years. And someone brought Prabhupada a copy of the original leaflet that he had printed in India when he set off on the Jaladuta to come to the West in 1965. Prabhupada was curious to see it and asked me to read it out to him. His picture was on the front with the title reading Srimad Bhagavatam, India's Message of Peace and Goodwill in 60 volumes of elaborate English version by Tridandi Goswami A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, carried by the Sindhi Steam Navigation Company Limited of Bombay all over the world for scientific knowledge of God. So that was the opening page. While Prabhupada relaxed behind his desk, I read out the body of the text. It says, the sufferings of the entire human society can at once be brought under control simply by individual practice of bhakti yoga, a simple and easy process of chanting the holy name of God. Every country, every nation, and every community throughout the world has some conception of the holy name of God, and as such, either the Hindus, Mohammedans, or Christians, everyone can easily chant the holy name of God in a meditative mood, and that will bring about the required peace and goodwill in the present problematic human society. Any inquiry in this connection will be gladly answered by Sri Swamiji. The Hindus generally chant the holy name of God in a 16 chain of transcendental sound composed of 32 alphabets as Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The Vedic literatures, like the Upanishads and the Puranas, recommend the chanting of the above-mentioned 16 holy names at a stretch. And Lord Sri Chaitanya, whose cult of chanting the holy name of God has special importance on these transcendental sounds. In this age of Kali, or the age of hate, hypocrisy, corruption, and quarrel, the only remedial measure is that every man should chant the holy name of the Lord, both individually and collectively. And the rest of it went on to give the English translations of the 8 prayers written by Lord Chaitanya in glorification of the holy name. And it ended with some highly complimentary reviews of Prabhupada's translation of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this is very interesting. What is Prabhupada saying here? It's the same thing, a little bit of embellishment to attract people to what he was doing, do a bit of advertising. So he opens up with this, that it's Srimad Bhagavatam is India's message of peace and goodwill. So it's not, peace and goodwill people can appreciate. But if you start telling them much more philosophy, they think, it's just soliciting or whatever. So Prabhupada put that it was India's message of peace and goodwill. And then he says 60 volumes of the elaborate English version. So at that time he only had the 3 volumes, but he's going there with this pamphlet saying there's 60 volumes, and carried by the Sindhi Steam Navigation Company Limited in Bombay, all over the world. Right? They're giving him a ticket from India to America, and if he wanted, then his passage back. Prabhupada is already advertising. Maybe he was trying to, use a bit of psychology on Samati Maharaji. That no, it says here that you're going to carry me all around the world. And then he says, for scientific knowledge of God. And Prabhupada knew very well, I mentioned this yesterday, that science was predominant. If you were a scientist, people respected you. Whatever a scientist says, you've got to believe it, And if you don't believe in science, you're some kind of throwback to the Middle Ages or something. So Prabhupada was basically saying that he was going to challenge the scientific community. Yeah, this is real science, scientific knowledge of God. He used those words, specifically, because most scientists, it's either science or religion, but they can't figure out how to bring the two together. And science predominates at this point. So for the scientists, to them, any scripture is worthless. It's just fairy stories. So scientists, they'll never speak about both things together. Yeah, religion or science. But Prabhupada's saying here that I'm coming to teach you scientific knowledge of God. So no regular scientist would accept that there is a scientific explanation for God's existence. But Prabhupada's boldly proclaiming scientific knowledge of God. And actually, as I mentioned, in April of 1966, there was this Time magazine cover in 3 big letters, "Is God Dead?" So that was the mood, and that was what Prabhupada was coming into, with the chanting, with the Bhagavatam, etc. He knew very well what the condition was, what he had to face, and he was up for it. It was a challenge. But more than anything, of course, it was the fulfillment of his Guru Maharaj's desire. They tried in the since 1927, they changed the Sajantoshini, Bhaktivedanta Thakur's, one of his periodicals. They changed it to an English language publication, The Harmonist. So that was in preparation for the time the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati hoped he would personally go to England. When these 3 men got there, they were to set up some kind of a base, and then he said he would personally go there and he would not come back to India until he, spread Krishna consciousness in the Western countries. Somehow or another it didn't happen. But Prabhupada knew that desire was there, and he had particularly been told to preach in the English language. So now him going to America was the culmination of everything that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati wanted. He was going to make the attempt at least to do that. So anyway, that's 3 things there, that 60 volumes of the Bhagavatam all over the world, with the sponsorship of Samadhi Maharaji, and teaching scientific knowledge of God. So that's Prabhupada's statement. That's in the essence what Prabhupada is or was. So let's see. Oh, okay. This is the little bit in the 2nd volume of the 1st canto, when Prabhupada talks about, the number of volumes that he's translating. I forgot that I had it on the computer, so I'll read this out. This is Prabhupada's answer to people that were thinking that you're an old man, you'll never make it, it's a useless attempt. How are you going to translate 18,000 verses and make a commentary on them when you're already in your mid-60s? So Prabhupada answers that criticism in the front piece of the book, 2nd volume. He says, "An unbeliever friend became astonished to learn that we have taken up a mighty project for presenting 60 volumes of 400 pages each, simply for the matter of glorifying the Lord. But we should not forget to remember that the Lord is unlimited. This material world is a fragmental portion of His unfathomable glories, out of which this tiny earth is one particle only. And on the surface of the earth there are numberless cities, and on each and every one of them there are hundreds of printing houses, all engaged in the matter of broadcasting the message of this limited space. We can just imagine how many hundreds of thousands of volumes we may need to glorify the activities of the unlimited Lord. Therefore, 60 volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam are just a sample distribution of His glories, presented in a manner understandable by the stagnant brain of the residents of this insignificant globe. I love that. The stagnant brain of the residents of this insignificant globe. Otherwise, the residents of the higher planets, who have got superior brains than men, do go through thousands and millions of volumes of Srimad Bhagavatam just to know the glories of the Lord. So that's a beautiful explanation. So people wonder like that, they've got the Quran or they've got the Bible, it's just one book. We tell them we've got 70 or 80 books. And what is there to talk about? They don't know anything about God, so they can't figure out how somebody can write 60 volumes, 400 pages each, about God. Yeah, you ask most people what is God, they have no idea, they can't tell you. But this is the specific feature of the Bhagavatam. The whole thing is about glorifying and exposing, who God actually is, what our relationship with Him is, what this material world is. It's all there in the Bhagavatam. But these people have such thick heads that they can't, they can't comprehend it. So, no compromise. Prabhupada knew what he wanted to do, and he had a plan. Because it was flexible, it's not that everything Prabhupada said to do, we actually were able to do. But because Prabhupada had unlimited, programs that he wanted to institute through ISKCON, we did what we could. Prabhupada accepted that, but there was always a lot more that needed to be done. So anyway, Prabhupada was, the rock. He was very firm and determined, dynamic. So myself and Harikesh were sitting with Prabhupada in his room in early August of 1976, and we were just chit-chatting. So this was in New Mayapur in France. And we'd been talking about Prabhupada's attempt to spread Krishna consciousness or Vedic culture in the West. It's very difficult, and what a tough job Prabhupada was taking on. So when Harikesh observed that the 4 sinful acts that we avoid are all unnatural, eating meat and this kind of thing, it's all unnatural. Prabhupada agreed. He said, unnatural, yes. What for smoking? What for drinking? How nicely our devotees just sit down on the ground and take prasadam. Why is there need for a table and a chair and these dishes and fork and knife and so on and so on? Why? So Harikesh laughed. He said, well, it's hard to cut the meat. You need a good surface and a sharp knife. So Prabhupada also laughed. He said, our Bon Maharaj again. He said, our Bon Maharaj, he was, once I was eating at his festival that he put on. So he's a Bodhisahib. You know what that is, Bodhisahib, big Westerner. So Prabhupada was criticizing him indirectly. He said he's a Bodhisahib. So he is given a fork and a knife. So they're having a festival. We just sit down, banana leaf plates or whatever, and we eat. Bon Maharaj was trying to show his sophistication because he'd been to the West. Now he knew the highest standard. So he had given everybody a knife and fork. So Prabhupada said, so I did not know, I did not remember even which way to take the fork. Prabhupada always used his hands. So Bon Maharaj began to criticize. Oh, you were going to a foreign country and you do not know which hand to take this fork and knife? So he apparently, this must have been in 65, he knew that Prabhupada was about to set off for the West. So he was trying to give him some good advice. I've been to the West now, you haven't been, I'll give you some good advice, that kind of, attitude. So you're going to the foreign country and you do not know what hand to take this fork and knife? So I told him, I'm not going to learn all these things. I'm going to teach them something else, to forget it. You went there to learn all these things, but I'm not going to learn anything. So, The same thing when Prabhupada arrived in New York. One time he met somebody from the Ramakrishna mission, one of the so-called swamis, and the man was dressed in a suit and tie, and Prabhupada was talking to him just to get some idea of the lay of the land, so to speak. What is New York all about? How to survive here? Where are the places to go? So he thought, anyway, even though they're all Mayavadis, they're here, they've got a center, why not find out what they want, what they're doing, and how they're doing it? So this so-called sannyasi from the Ramakrishna mission, he told Prabhupada, he said, first thing is you have to change your cloth. Nobody will talk to you if you're dressed like a sannyasi. You have to wear a suit and coat and tie and whatever. So Prabhupada, he said, I completely, disregarded what he told me. This man can't teach me anything. So he was determined. He was not going to change himself, but he was going to change the people that he met. That was his mission. So in a letter to Karanda, this was at Bhaktivedanta Manor, in July of 1973, Prabhupada tells Karanda, when my Guru Maharaj was present, even big scholars were afraid to talk with his beginning students, or to speak about talk with Bhaktisiddhanta. They were afraid of talking with his disciples. So my Guru Maharaj was called the living encyclopedia. He could talk with anyone on any subject. He was so learned. So we should be like that as far as possible. No compromise. Ramakrishna, avatars, yogis, everybody was an enemy to Guru Maharaj. He never compromised. So some godbrothers complained that this preaching was a chopping technique and it would not be successful. Yeah, they thought it was just too blunt and upfront, chopping. But we have seen that those who criticized him, they all fell down. For my part, I have taken up the policy of my Guru Maharaj, no compromise. So all these so-called scholars, scientists, philosophers who do not accept Krishna are nothing more than fools and rascals and the lowest of mankind. So, this is how Prabhupada got us stoked up. That's what we liked about him. No change. He knew exactly what was going on. He knew exactly what to do. All we had to do was accept his instructions and execute it, that's all. And it was like magic. Year after year, new temples opening all over the place. Devotees would just, here's a city we haven't been to. Sometimes we would just hitchhike there to some city we had no money, but we'd find somewhere to stay. We'd just rely on Krishna sending somebody along that could help us. We'd sell some incense sticks or something and start a temple and start preaching, and then people would come, and then some of them would go to another city, and that way we spread. And Prabhupada was, there pushing us like anything. And not just by word, by action. Prabhupada himself was constantly traveling all the time, preaching like anything, meeting hundreds and thousands of different people, giving lectures, big pandals. He was tireless. And at the same time, his body was finished. The fact is that Prabhupada told us, he said, I am never all right, I'm always ill. He had lots of problems. His kidney wasn't working properly, so his hands and feet would swell up with uremia. He had heart palpitations, his teeth were dropping out. So many problems were there. Prabhupada just kept on going. Whenever we tried to get medicine for him, he'd let us buy the medicine, but he would never take it. In New York in 1976, we were there for about 11 days, 10 or 11 days. And we had a one-day trip to Gitanagari. So we went there on one of the Radha Damodar traveling Sankirtan buses. They had these big Greyhound buses. So we drove down there with Prabhupada to Gitanagari. It was a 5-hour trip. And we stayed overnight. So in the middle of the night, I heard the buzzer ringing, Prabhupada's buzzer. And when I went in, Prabhupada was sitting very quietly with his head down. And when he looked up, I could see his face was very, pale. And he told me, he said that my kidney is giving me so much trouble I can't work. So if there was a point where Prabhupada couldn't sit down and write the Bhagavatam, you knew that it was very serious. So I was trying to think, I mean, we didn't know it. He didn't give any hint about what we should do about it. So the only thing that I could think of was that, when we get back to New York, can we call a doctor? So Prabhupada, he agreed, tentatively. All right, he said, undoubtedly there is some disease, so let's see what they have to say. So I thought that was a major, victory in persuading him to let the doctor come and see him. When we got back to New York, this Dr. Bhagat, he came, he was a life member. He diagnosed a kidney. One kidney was only half functioning, the other kidney was practically not functioning at all. And there were various other ailments. So he prescribed 5 different medicines, all allopathic, something like a painkiller, something to put him to sleep, something like antibiotic to treat the disease. So 5 different medicines. So when the doctor had left, the local temple president, Adi Kashvari, said, so let's buy these medicines for Prabhupada. I said, well, you can buy them if you like. I can tell you right now he won't take them. So they bought the medicines, they put them on his desk, Prabhupada just moved them away. He said, we already have the holy name, that's all we need. So, is there anybody here that's had problems with the kidneys? Well, I'll tell you what happens. Kidney stones or whatever. One time, Sadadanya Prabhu he lives in Mayapur. So he got some kidney problem and it was nearly killing him. So we put him into the hospital. I wasn't there at the time, but they took him to hospital. And I didn't see him for 2 or 3 days. Then later, when he came out of the hospital, I met him in the Calcutta temple. And I asked him, how did it go? So he said, well, in the hospital, they have a special wing of the hospital that's just for kidney patients. And I said, why is that? He said, because it's so painful, even if you get pumped full of, painkillers, it has no effect. So all the people that have kidney problems, they put them all together because they're all screaming and yelling in agony. So that they don't want to disturb the other patients in the rest of the hospital. So it's a heavy disease. There was one devotee from Australia, Sauri Prabhu, and I got a call. This was when I was at GBC there. I got a call from the temple that Chidahari's here, and it's very urgent. We got to take him to the hospital. So I went down, and he was literally rolling on the floor in agony, holding his kidney. He had a huge kidney stone as big as a peanut, and it got trapped there. He couldn't flush it out, and I thought he was going to die. He was in so much pain. It took 2 or 3 days, and then he came out. He was okay again. So, Prabhupada, somehow or another, was able to transcend so many problems and difficulties. He went on with his work. He went on with his preaching. He went on with his translation. Just recently, I've been working on producing another diary that I was keeping. Some of you have seen the Transcendental Diary series. So that was when I was with Prabhupada as his servant. After March of 1977, he sent me back to Australia and made me the GBC there. So in May, when Prabhupada called all the GBCs to Vrindavan when he thought he was going to leave, and he did his will and everything. So I went there. And that immediate crisis kind of cleared up. But I spoke with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. He was the Prabhupada's permanent secretary. And Prabhupada had a system that he had a permanent secretary, and then any other GBC, they could come for 1 month and travel with Prabhupada and get his association and get instruction from him. So I thought, now I'm here, and now I'm a GBC, I'll apply for the month of October. So I put my name down to be the visiting GBC for October. And as it turned out, when I got there at the end of September to start my 1 month, the same night that I arrived there, Prabhupada called all the senior men into his rooms, and he asked us one by one, should I stay in Bombay because the construction was going on, we were getting near to the opening, a couple of months, or should I go to Vrindavan? So we each gave our vote. I asked him, is it for preaching or is it, for health? So Prabhupada said it's for health. So then I voted, all right, let's go to Bombay. So we went to Bombay. To go to Vrindavan. We went from Bombay to Vrindavan. I went ahead. Tamal Krishna Maharaj asked me to take, it was literally the last flight of the day. I flew from Bombay to Delhi. And at that time the TP was Bhaktivedanta Swami. He was from Australia, he was an old friend of mine. So he had one, like congregational member. He wasn't initiated, but he was friendly. And he had a furniture store. So I told him we need a double bed, a big bed, so that if we have to treat Prabhupada, then there's room to move around. So he had one bed that was ready, so we took that. That's the bed that you see in Prabhupada's room in Vrindavan. And we got double thickness mattresses, cotton mattresses, and whatever other things we needed. I rang Tamal Krishna Maharaj that were ready for Prabhupada to come. And that same night they came by train to Mathura. In the morning we picked Prabhupada up from the Mathura railway station and took him back to Vrindavan. So that was, Prabhupada stayed for 6 weeks, and then in mid-November that was when he disappeared. So as soon as we got to Vrindavan, I immediately resumed writing a diary. The first diary that I had, I'd never written anything before, and I wasn't going to write about anybody except Prabhupada anyway. So when I left the party, I stopped keeping the diary. When I went back in October of '77, I resumed keeping up my diary. Tamal Krishna Maharaj is the secretary. He had already started writing his diary. That was largely because I had pressured him the previous March when he first came on as the permanent secretary. Then I was leaving, and I suddenly realized how important it is that he keep up this diary so that we know everything that Prabhupada was doing. And so I went to see him and I told him, I'm keeping this diary. Now I'm going back to Australia, so there's nobody to do it, so you have to do this. So he was quite negative at the beginning. He was extremely busy. Prabhupada was ill. There's a lot of things to be taken care of. And he said, no, I can't. I haven't got the time. So I pressured him. I said, Maharaj, you must do this. I said, what do we know, from the beginning of the 70s up until now of what Prabhupada has been doing? Where's the record of that? If we don't write it down, because we got the recordings of conversations and things, but the scenario, the context, you don't always understand that. So diary, and there was a lot of stuff that happened that we didn't record. So keeping a diary was the best way to do that. So I really pressured him that you have to do this, otherwise we're going to lose so much information about Prabhupada. So, I'll see. That was the most commitment that I could get out of him. I'll see. So if you look at his diary, TKG's diary, it begins, I guess, around about April the 10th or something like that. So that means that from when I left the party in March 13th, there was about a 1 month gap where Tamal Krishna Maharaj didn't do the diary. But it was good that it stuck in his mind, and then he started in mid-April, and from then on to the end, Prabhupada's disappearance. So just recently, that diary that I kept for October 1977, when I went back to Australia, I just put it in my suitcase, and I never looked at it again for about 30 years. And just recently, of course, now I've noticed that we're getting older in various ways. I've got so many God brothers and God sisters that are, departed. There's every year now there's more and more of them going. So I thought I'd better get serious again about writing. So I've started working on that October 1977 diary. That one's about 3/4 done. And once I finish that, then I have 2 more volumes of the Transcendental Diary still to be done, and that's like 600 pages each. So I've started to realize I don't have as much time as I thought, and I better get to it. So that will come at some point. Anyway, the point is that we have to know as much about Prabhupada as possible. The more that we hear, the more enlivened we become, the more fixed in our Krishna consciousness we become. So that's our hope, that we'll get those as much information as possible out, and Prabhupada's will be manifest, to have a worldwide influence. In the future, I'm sure Prabhupada, he did tell 1 or 2 people that if you work hard, you can make your whole country Krishna conscious. Places like Fiji, where there's a big Indian population, Gujarati mainly, or places like Manipur, where Bhaktiswarupa Damodar Maharaj, Prabhupada told him you spend 6 months on your scientific research and activities and 6 months on teaching spiritual life in Manipur. So he did that to whatever extent he could. So anyway, we have to keep Prabhupada alive. That's the fact. Just as Krishna, Prabhupada says in one of his purports in the Srimad Bhagavatam, that Krishna appears on every page. So that's what we want with Srila Prabhupada, that everybody keep him and his activities and his teachings in the forefront of their consciousness, and things will go on. They'll happen, whatever it is, however ambitious you are. Krishna will fulfill the desire if it's, genuine. So now we're in a situation, 50 years ago, when the devotees started, we were being chased off the street by the police, and we were regarded as weirdos and, running around with bed sheets wrapped around us and like that. And now, 50 years later, we're giving lectures in the Houses of Parliament in London. Yeah, we celebrate Diwali in the Houses of Parliament, and it's an amazing transformation. So that's all the mercy of the Holy Name, and Prabhupada knew that. If you're genuine in your chanting, everything else will come as a result of that. So, all right, it's 10 to 9. I'm getting a little throaty here. So does anybody have any questions or comments? Anybody?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. It's already a tough task to do personal service to Srila Prabhupada physically also. So how it was possible for you to maintain this daily, and how long practically you spend every day? How do you manage it?
Well, I was with Prabhupada for 16 months in one stretch, and then another month in 77. You really, to be with Prabhupada for any length of time, you really had to be in the best consciousness that you could be in, just to stay, within his circle. Prabhupada was naturally, unlimitedly Krishna conscious. But for us, we were Malechas and Yavanas, we had so many bad habits, we weren't kind of really what you could call pure devotees by any means. But the thing that kept us going was, sincerity. Prabhupada knew that we would make mistakes and he would tolerate them. But if we repeatedly did the same mistakes, then he'd get angry. So sometimes he would praise you, sometimes he would give a mild chastisement, and sometimes he would blow you out the door, with anger. All of those were methods that, gradually taught us what it means to be a Krishna conscious devotee. So personally, I always loved to be with Prabhupada. As I mentioned before, anything that was going on in his room, I was in there. And I was trying to learn as much as I could how Prabhupada did things. Because I knew in the future that I'd have to go out and preach. Prabhupada wasn't training me up, just to be what he called his oil smearing secretary. He introduced me one time. There was some reporters that came to Mayapur, and Tamal Krishna was there, Jayapataka was there, so Prabhupada, somebody else. Prabhupada was having his massage on the roof, and so he introduced the news reporters to each of his men. And I didn't expect, because of course I was just, the personal servant. I'm in the background just doing the massage. So Prabhupada said, this is Tamal Krishna Goswami, this is Jayapataka Swami, this is this and that. And they said, and this is Harry Sauri, he's my oil smearing secretary. So I like that, that was nice. So, however Prabhupada dealt with you, it was always to increase your Krishna consciousness. I mean, there was other times when I got absolutely pasted, for doing something stupid. And Prabhupada, really let me have it. But the result of that was that it cleared away all the maya, all the cloudy consciousness that had caused me to do something in an unacceptable way. It just, one yell from Prabhupada that just cleared the whole thing up. And, So anyway, I stuck to it as long as I could. But by February of 1977, we got into Mayapur. I started to realize, Prabhupada's illnesses, he was getting weaker and weaker. And one morning he told me that in my whole life I have never felt as weak as I do now, but still I would like to finish this Bhagavatam. So that was his kind of mood. Prabhupada knew, his whatever good health he had was now dissipated. And he got very sick just after that. So at the same time, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had come on as the permanent secretary. He had spent 8 years, in the early part of the existence of ISKCON, selling books, distribution, and the Radha Damodar party, and he was very successful at that. And then he turned up in February of 77, and he had changed. He told me that he was going to give up his GBC managerial roles, and he wanted to become Prabhupada's permanent secretary and look after him for as long as he was going to be left on the planet. So he asked Prabhupada if he could do that, and Prabhupada was very happy, yes, because Tamal was the most competent manager in ISKCON. At the same time that he was thinking, now I've done some preaching, now I want to get the association of Prabhupada. He never really spent much time with him because he was always coming and going, So, but like a block of time, he'd never done that. Maybe 1 month was the maximum. So his feeling was that now, with whatever little time was left, I want to stay with Prabhupada personally and look after him. I was thinking the opposite, that I've had 16 months of serving Prabhupada personally, and I increasingly got the feeling that Prabhupada was about to change his Leela. His preaching activities were going to wind down, he was going to retire and into this Nirjana Bhajan stage. And I took it that Tamal Krishna Maharaj's change of heart was part of the indication that that's what Prabhupada intended. Because in my own heart, I was starting to feel that now my time is up. Prabhupada, very generously kept me on his party even though I wasn't fit for it. And it's not that he told me, now I want you to go and do something else. If I hadn't brought the topic up myself, I would, have stayed on the party without any question. But I knew my time now is finished. I have to go out, whatever I've learnt from Prabhupada, I have to go out and preach. So I told this to Prabhupada in March of 77. So immediately, the first question was, well, what will you do? So I said, I don't know, I'm not sure at this point what services are available. So he asked me, he said, what about Hyderabad? Because we'd just been down there a couple of months before. And I said, well, of course I'll do whatever you ask, but I'm not really keen on, Hyderabad. I'm not very attracted to serving there. He said, that's all right, I was just asking. So he said, all right, we'll think about it. So the next morning, Prabhupada was sitting kind of half up on the bed. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I mean, the whole routine of how we were dealing with him had changed. So Prabhupada called me in at 6 o'clock and had me massage him. And then he again brought this up. He said, so have you thought about what you're going to do? So again I said, well, not, I can't really think of anything. There were a couple of things that were going on in my mind, but I didn't say them immediately. So Prabhupada told me, he said, go and fetch him, means Tamal Krishna Maharaj. So Tamal came in, he sat on the floor, Prabhupada and I were up on the bed. And Prabhupada looked at Tamal and he said, so he wants to leave me. What should he do? Where should he go? So Tamal Krishna Maharaj just kind of laughed. He said, well, I don't, Hari Sauri has got so many, good attributes. He said, I'm sure any temple in the world would be happy to have him. So that didn't really answer the question. It was nice of him to say so, but, it didn't actually solve the problem. So what was going on in my mind was that at a minimum, I should find some way of staying in India. Because if I leave India, there's no chance that I'll ever be able to come back and join up with Prabhupada's party again. If I stay in India, there may be some chance that I can get some, personal service again at some point. So that was my first aim, was to convince him. And the way that the strategy that I took was that I had a British passport. And in those days, the Commonwealth countries, no visas were required. So because I was British, I didn't need a visa to stay in India. We could stay as long as we liked. Whereas the American devotees, there was no such arrangement. So they were allowed 3 or 6 months. And then they had to leave and get a new visa and come back. So it was very expensive and disruptive, to the development of the movement. So I was thinking, now if I tell Prabhupada, remind Prabhupada that I've got this British passport, he's bound to say, yes, you should definitely stay in India, right? So I put it to him, I said, of course, I've got a British passport. Prabhupada didn't say anything. He didn't respond to it. So my second line of defense was that I knew that Giriraj, he was in charge in Bombay, so he was starting up a college preaching program. So I said, well, of course, I could always go down to, Bombay and join up with the college preaching. Prabhupada didn't say anything. And then the thing that I didn't want the most, that's what ended up happening. During the festival, the GBCs had made Bhaktivedanta Prabhu the acting GBC of Australia. He was the first person to go to Australia, and then he was joined by Upendra 2 weeks later. They started the movement in Australia. Later on, he took sannyas. A year or so after that, he got in trouble with this lady, so Prabhupada got him married, and then he sent him back to Australia. So Prabhupada, he was looking for somebody to take up to help him in that role. So the last thing I wanted to do was to mention, Australia. But I swear, I was, my 2 lines of defense had dropped, and I was sitting there massaging, and it just literally forced its way out of my mouth that Bali Madam had just been here, and he had told me, if you ever want a ticket, you can always come to Australia and preach there. As soon as I said the word Australia, Prabhupada sat straight up, he said, yes. He said, Australia. I was just thinking the same thing myself. So it was so funny how it happened. We were all laughing because I was crying inside, but it was so funny the way that it happened. But I understood this is a super soul, because I was desperately trying to keep my lips closed and not say anything, and it just forced its way out, Australia. So that was it, we left. So anyway, I left Prabhupada's service at that point because I knew it was my time. I knew that this was the end of my personal service and that I should now go out and do some preaching from what I'd learned, from the time that I'd spent with Prabhupada. So anyway, there were quite a few servants. Some of them lasted longer than others. Srila Kirti, I think, was the longest serving servant of Prabhupada, 2 years. He did a 16-month stretch, as I did, but then he did 2 4-month stretches after that. So after that, I think Pradyumna was the one disciple that spent the most time with Prabhupada because he was Sanskritist. So when I was on the party in May of '76, we arrived in Honolulu and Prabhupada had sent for Pradyumna to come from South India. He had been learning Sanskrit and stuff here in South India, and Prabhupada sent for him to come to Hawaii. Once he got there, he stayed on the party up until Prabhupada's disappearance. So he had a very long stretch with Prabhupada. Other devotees, they would come and go, like Nitai. He was also doing Bengali and Sanskrit editing in Prabhupada's books. But he'd stay for a couple of weeks or a couple of months, then he'd want to go off and do something else somewhere else. So there's not many in the servants' club, if you like. But anyway, I was somehow or another fortunate to get that opportunity. And I think that, it's our responsibility to transfer what we've learnt as much as possible to the new generation of devotees so that Prabhupada his stature and position and remembrance of him is maintained properly. We have to do that. That's our duty. Here in South India, you've got Madhvacharya, you've got Ramanujacharya. They go back hundreds of years. So we've got ISKCON. We're doing the same kind of activity. And if we do it properly, then Krishna Consciousness will take over the world at some point when people come to a little sanity. So it's up to us now that we've been given such a unique opportunity, and especially the modern age with all the technological so-called advancements. We've got thousands of recordings of Prabhupada. We've got thousands of photographs of Prabhupada. There's a lot of stuff available that must be preserved and presented to the devotees. So that's our duty to do that. There's no excuse, of losing contact with Prabhupada, because he was probably the most recognized, if you like, acharya in the history of Vaishnavism. Nobody traveled around the world like Prabhupada did, nobody. And, the feats that he accomplished, setting up schools, restaurants, temples, deity worship, so many things that Prabhupada did, it's just unbelievable how any one man could have done so much work. So we really have a duty and we have no excuse. There's every type of recording media is available, and we must get as much of, Prabhupada as we can, or at least, not get now, but at that time that was one of the things that we had to do. Now we have to carry that forward. So anyway, yes, it really was very exceptional opportunity to travel with Srila Prabhupada. There's no question of that. It changed my consciousness, I know that much. When I was a karmi and I became a devotee, that was a complete change in consciousness, radical. Everything that I'd known, all the friends that I had, all my relatives, I just walked away from them and joined the temple in Sydney. And they all thought we were crazy for doing that. We knew what we were doing, Prabhupada knew what we were doing, and we had complete faith in Prabhupada. So we have a debt Yeah, to Srila Prabhupada. And what I was going to say, sorry, is that coming out of karma life into devotional life was a major change in consciousness. But then when I joined Prabhupada's party as his servant, that was another, huge step in, boosting my Krishna consciousness. It was like yet another stage. So, what can we say? We owe Prabhupada our lives. Yeah, if we don't have Prabhupada there, we have nothing. That's the fact. So that answer your question? It's 9:10. We're going to finish. We'll continue with this, if you will allow me, for the rest of the sessions that we're going to have tomorrow morning and in the evening. And we'll learn a bit more about Prabhupada's chanting. So, thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
His Grace Hari Sauri Prabhu ki
Jai.